Mr Franklin to come back, and he has now.
Thank you so much, Mr Chair. Much appreciated. Apologies.
Thank you very much for coming. Mr Glendenning, starting with you, could you please give us your full name, title, and swear either an oath or an affirmation?
My name's Lionel Glendenning. I'm a retired architect. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. And Ms Schofield, could you do the same?
I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And your full name and title, or you're a private citizen? No.
Anne Schofield.
Thank you. Would either of you like to start with an opening statement of a couple of minutes, please? Or both of you?
I'll start,
Thank you.
because mine is quite brief. I'm speaking as an honorary consultant and life fellow of the Powerhouse Museum, a major donor of antique jewellery and historical costume, and as a representative of the many donors and benefactors to that museum over the past 30 years. I acknowledge and applaud the government's recent decision to keep the Powerhouse in Ultimo, and I urge the government to provide sufficient funding to revitalise the museum and devise a plan of exciting and marketable shows that can display rarely seen material, honour past donors, attract new donors, support development, and grow the visitor base, with particular emphasis on families. Perhaps starting with an exhibition called Treasures of the Powerhouse. At the outset, I would like to point out to the committee members that there seems to be some confusion in the public perception about what is a museum and what is a gallery. In general, museums hold collections of historical material and objects which are rare and important in our social life and culture. Galleries hold collections and show exhibitions of art, antique and contemporary paintings and sculpture. Of course, both are integral to our cultural life, but not one instead of the other. Art galleries should not be valued more highly than museums. Museums are about collections. The collections at the Powerhouse Museum include science, technology, and decorative arts, which include furniture, musical instruments, ceramics, glassware, leatherwork, weaponry and armour, metalwork and jewellery, textiles, carpets, lacework and fashion, among many others. And these collections are large enough to be shared with other regional museums and loaned to other museums for special exhibitions. And this, I feel, should be the preferred model for the Powerhouse Ultimo. A museum is also a place of learning, with professional museum curators who are experts in their field, striving to create visionary exhibitions for the future, inspired by the past. At the present time, during the COVID crisis, it's more important than ever to look into our own holdings for material for exhibitions and not rely on expensive imported exhibitions from overseas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Glendenning?
I'm fine.
No, fine. Okay, thank you very much. Questions?
Oh, yes. Ms. Schofield, you in your opening statement made reference to it, I put in inverted commas, a preferred model for the Powerhouse Museum. So does that imply that you are not happy with the direction or what's being proposed by the government at the moment?
Yes, that's exactly what it...
You were being a tad too diplomatic in your, Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think it's extremely important to retain the Powerhouse Museum and its collections. And I've been disturbed by suggestions that, a part of it may be removed and turned into a lyric theatre, for instance. Now, I mean, I think this is a really crazy idea. And I'm very involved in theatres because I've been involved with the Sydney Theatre Company for 30 years.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So, and I understand how difficult it is to attract audiences. And I think we have plenty of, we can't fill the theatres we have. And we haven't got any work for the artists and actors and the people, the people who create the furniture and the production people. And they're all sort of limping along in this particular time. I know it's a very difficult time. And I know that this decision was made before the COVID crisis. But I think it's really important to focus on a policy for the Powerhouse Museum so that people out there understand what it is, understand what the collections are. And I mean, exhibitions are essential to show people stories and to teach them and to entertain them and to delight them, I mean, I was involved in an exhibition of jewellery in 2014-15, and I learned from my private collection maybe, I think, 60 to 80 pieces for that exhibition. And it was the most fascinating exhibition with jewellery from ancient times right up to the modern day. And it ran for over a year in the Powerhouse, but the government couldn't find funds to make a catalogue or a brochure even. We didn't even have a brochure, I mean, it was an example of a lack of funding for something which I believe was very important.
Now, earlier today we had evidence from another witness talking about concerns that that Mark Newson had about his donations to his collection, and that he had concern that, in fact, he may, in fact, have to remove or would like to take them back because of concerns. Now, would you fall into a category, and do you know other people who have provided to the Powerhouse and have had similar concerns?
Absolutely. I mean, in my submission, I represent many, many donors who are terribly concerned by this lack of direction in the Powerhouse. They want to, donate items. They don't want them to go out to Parramatta. They're happy for them to stay in the city, in the CBD, and to be loaned out for special exhibitions to Parramatta or to regional museums. But they don't know what to do, and already we are losing collections. There's a very important collection of Australiana, which has just been donated to the National Museum of Australia. Now, this is a very important collection, and it would have, or some of it, most of it, the more important items would have been donated to the Powerhouse because it's owned by one of the former trustees. But you can't hang about waiting for the government to tell you what's happening. And this has been a real problem, I think the fact that people don't know what on earth is going on. And I think that's been really tragic for the Powerhouse. And it's a kind of white anting of the place. And people are just very confused about it all. And certainly a lot of antique dealers and collectors that I know are looking for other institutions, or were looking for other institutions to loan their things to, or to leave them in bequests. But now that we have a change of heart, we're not moving the Powerhouse, maybe they'll come back and decide to donate to the Powerhouse, because it is the place for these things.
Thank you.
Mr. Glendenning, I know you have strong views about the, I think you've described it as faux heritage listing of what is described in that heritage listing as the Ultimo Tramways Powerhouse. Could I ask you to expand upon those views?
Yes, very much so. My views changed radically when I read the first public statements from the Heritage Office when it sought public input into their, as I could term it, a faux listing. They're actually listing 2 brick walls. I mean, it to me, as an architect who's had deep involvement in the evolution of the powerhouse, who's referenced other architects, international critics, curators, masses of people who are far better informed than I about cultural issues, I began reading the document and that supported this public process. And I must say I prepared a passionate and robust response. There were so many issues embedded in the consultants who prepared the report for consideration by the Heritage Council. And seriously, it began with the title of the paper. For a short period of time, I think, someone somewhere deep in the bureaucracy of the engineering, electrical, railways departments called it the Ultimo Tramways Power Station. And it's been from its beginning in 1890s, the Ultimo Powerhouse. Its name now is the Powerhouse. They then compounded that error later by calling it the Powerhouse at 500 Harris Street, which is not. It's always addressed MacArthur Street, strangely, but that's just a minor issue. No, I then went through the report basically line by line, and apart from the insults that the consultant made about Leo Schofield and Ken Woolley, who I worked with for many years, a master, members of a jury. They even took on the Institute of Architects and their award systems. I mean, it ranged incredibly wide. They created, I think, a sense that what was an incredible apotheosis on that site when the museum moved 200 metres from its original site, from the Garden Palace where the fire occurred and destroyed the very first collection in the 1870s. It had been extant pretty much in this precinct for 140 years. It was dismissed, just simply dismissed, not relevant. The collection, not relevant. 2 brick walls became the focus of this weird faux Clayton's listing, heritage listing. So I had a go at it, having had experience on the Heritage Council many years ago as the government architect substitute, fairly familiar with issues relating to heritage and what have you, the Borough Charter and all the other issues that apply to heritage listings. Yes, my report stands. I still think it's pretty much a fair summation of the basis on which the Heritage Council were proceeding. They subsequently must have listened to me, because I noticed that just a week or so ago they've asked or called for consultants who might be interested in modern architecture from the 70s and on. So I have had an effect on how they consider the whole site, because to consider the building only as the remnant brickwork and to make errors about what was saved and what wasn't saved and how it was saved just struck me as a terribly poor basis on which to begin to make a judgment about listing. I notice also that in the minutes of the Heritage Council, they've deferred consideration of the majority view of submissions, that they should list the whole site, the precinct, the collection and the buildings, including the modern buildings.
Given your critical role on that site,
Yeah. Well, they even questioned that in the draft, the final submission. I have to tell you, I'm pretty upset about it.
I didn't pick that up. What was that, Mr. Glendenning?
Where they referenced not only my wife's essay on the building, but my role as an architect in the they cast doubt on whether I had that lead role. And I admit there was a vast team of people working on the project. God,
You'd
I
hope
went
so.
down there with a hammer and nail and made a museum, for God's sake. Seriously. Great buildings are built by large teams of people, and as an architect, you're basically a ringmaster towards the middle and end of the project.
If you take that approach, Renzo Piano has
That's
been
true.
an architect on not a single
Exactly
building on the
so.
planet.
Yes.
If is it your position? Do you think it would be useful if this committee recommended that the heritage listing be expanded to include what you said
I
earlier?
think it'd be fundamental. Look, this committee has been such a critical element of the whole evolution of the last 5 years, of the difficulties that the government's faced in arriving at a rational solution to what they want to do, which we've supported from day one. Day one, the Powerhouse Alliance came together to save the Powerhouse Museum in Ultimo and to say that it was a very viable and necessary future cultural move to build Western Sydney cultural facilities. There's no argument. It's a strange thing that we sit here at this table again. Look, I made comments about Gladys in Wonderland last time I was sitting here. I'm now going to say it's more like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just flabbergasted that we've ended up in these circumstances. We've spent over $50 million on consultants. We're in a circumstance where 5 years later, look, I could go out and start the process again and no one would notice that anything had changed. I certainly wouldn't be building, as you've seen in other testimonies today, build on a flood-prone site. And one of my papers, again, the EIS was pronounced, public exhibition. I get the document, I read it. I cannot believe it. I think maybe I'm an idiot. I take it to a friend, a very noted cultural architect who I respect immensely and who worked in the government at the highest level as a senior architect. And we sat down on a Saturday afternoon for 2 hours and we arrived at 30 or 40 issues. And this is subsequent to the announcement by the government that the Powerhouse won't be moving. The brief for the building at Parramatta is based on the museum in Sydney. Okay, it's got all the problems that Sydney had writ large, large spaces. I said at the time the Powerhouse was beginning to Premier, the great spaces of the boiler hall would cost a fortune to replicate in modern buildings. That was the rational basis on which we restored the original Powerhouse buildings. You've replicated at Parramatta. Suddenly, you're spending $1 billion. I mean, you can't make it up. This is what they're trying to do. The building is, not only are those spaces laid out, if you lay them end to end, they'd occupy 10 times the site. They've stacked them. One load upon another load upon another load. As I explained to someone who said there's too many columns in the Powerhouse in Ultimo, there's a thing called gravity.
Yeah.
And these people are denying...
You're an architect, aren't
They're
you?
denying gravity at Parramatta.
And then the gravity's the same out at Parramatta as Ultimo. is my
Well, it's going to be an
Well, it's actually-
interesting
it's wet
question
gravity.
is whether the gravity wins by sinking it into the mud or whether it climbs out of it. I'm sorry, but I can't seriously deal with the issue because, in analysing the building dispassionately, and I must say, both the other architect and myself reached different conclusions as to whether it was worth building on the site from a flood point of view. I don't believe it's sensible to build a cultural building with a massive visitor, particularly visitors, right? One day they're there, one day they're not. If you're regularly there, you can probably manage it a bit like a lifeboat on a cruise ship. But that's a subtle line. But the flood issue is profound, and I think you shouldn't be building a cultural building on a flood-prone site. That puts aside all the other issues of function and access and all the other things that are doubtful in the relation or the way in which the solution of the building has been made. It's just simply not a viable thing to do, to put so many visitors at risk in a cultural institution on a flood-prone site.
Have you had the benefit of reading the most recent Molino-Stewart flood risk review, the July 2021?
It's damning. It is an indictment. I cannot tell you that other consultants preparing reports have arrived at obviously conclusions that may in fact be faulty. That's my conclusion. As an architect, I would not proceed further.
Well, you've come to the end of my question here.
He jumped in.
Back up, go home.
But what this report says, based upon the material in the EIS, that you have extraordinary problems with it. You've got the cascade of water going down the escape
That is a scary
paths.
issue. Not only have they reduced the perfectly valid link from the Parramatta Square down to the riverfront, a 20-metre wide, it's also a flood path, which they've now constricted down to 9 metres, and then use the 9 metres and the spaces around the edge as the escape route from people on the riverfront. So, you'll be wheeling chairs and prams through the floodwater up the hill as it comes rushing down towards you. It's hard to perceive the reality as we sit in the glorious sunshine of an early spring. We've just had 2 East Coast lows go through. 2 East Coast lows, each dumped 100 mil on Parramatta. We've increased the paved surfaces in Parramatta. We've built huge buildings that collect on their facades water, all rushing to the base. I didn't see anywhere in the solution a stormwater retention system in this building to damp down the flood flow, which I thought was current code requirement, that you'd have to hold part of the flood back on your site that you're responsible for so you don't add to the problem.
When
Good luck. Here's the life vest. Off you go.
Well, there's no lifeboats either.
There's the thought.
when there's discussion about the flooding risk to the undercroft spaces,
Yes.
the report says that's likely to place people will take shelter when,
That's right,
when there's
out of
heavy
the
rain.
and what have you.
But then they talk about there being 2 problems. The first is that it is necessary to walk down towards the river before being able to walk up to flood-free ground.
Oh, it's madness. If I designed a fire escape like that, I think I'd be visiting the local courts up the road,
It's like putting
Coroner's
a
court.
fire escape through the furnace, isn't it?
It is, basically, yes, absolutely.
And then the second is that the routes up are designed as overland flow paths. And the conclusion is that people sheltering in within these spaces may not appreciate just how high and how quickly the river can rise, and they become entrapments in which people drown or they drown trying to leave them.
Correct. They have to go towards the river to leave the site. That's how the system works. You can't come out the side of an undercroft. And the other problem that arises too, if you stop people going in there for security and vandalism, noise, all the rest of it, you build a fence, don't you? And what happens with all the debris that builds up? You're adding to the problem of rising flood. You're increasing a debris. You're basically building. If you look at what was on the site after the last flood, there were masses. It's debris, timber, pieces of wood, plastic accumulations. You wouldn't survive. You would not survive in that.
Which is something I think can be usefully explored with the flood experts about the blocking of their large pipe proposals.
Well, therein lies the other problem, that the basis on which the Arup report was prepared, I believe, as the Molino-Stewart report, who are the experts, I might add, because they've prepared studies for Parramatta, for the Parramatta City Council, that shows that they may have used the wrong base for their calculations on the flood, in that they have an arrangement where they calculate the amount of blockage in the system itself. And as you well know with your own house, you get backflows, your leaves fill up your downpipes. This system is no different, it's just bigger. And the risk is higher as a consequence. So let's put 2 million people a year through there and see how it goes. And run the risk. It is a risk. It's a question of risk. I would not take the risk as a professional. Others might. I don't know.
Using your expertise as an architect, do you think you can design away these problems?
I don't believe so. Not at this level. You're taking you're dealing with people's lives, and also much of the solution lies in the management of how you do it. And we all know what management systems are like. We've seen the Ruby Princess, and there's an example of management systems, and they don't work. They're driven by human beings, and in the best of worlds, someone will make a mistake, and you can't guarantee that that won't occur. And therein lies the risk. For me, I would not risk doing that and relying on security systems which have been handed down from one generation to the next through the building's life. And this building, would you believe, they're saying 100 years, which is something I said about the Ultimo powerhouse, but after 30 years, it's not fit for purpose, is it? Well, you know, is this thing going to be fit for purpose in 30 years? Not according to the current belief.
I wanted to ask Ms. Schofield,
Oh,
just in relation to the people that you indicated, you've spoken to and represent people who have significant collections who might be minded to make bequeaths of them or contributions of them to the powerhouse. The current vision that we've got from the government, there's still a lot of detail missing, but subsequent to the July 4 announcement was keeping the Ultimo powerhouse site, but perhaps as some kind of cultural precinct, unclear what that means, perhaps even as some kind of theatre space or sort of artist workspace, with the three large objects, the Bolton and Watt, the Locomotive No. 1 and the Catalina on that site, but still the Parramatta site seems to be the primary site, the main site. The staff, for example, from the powerhouse would be intended to move out to Parramatta and be based there. So, you know, you indicated that people were keen to support the powerhouse, you know, as it has been existing in Ultimo. Would that type of model split over 2 or even 3, if you include the storage facility in Castle Hill, would that meet the kind of aspirations of people who might be wanting to make contributions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that I have always said, yes, there should be a museum or a cultural centre in Parramatta. But it's a crazy, I mean, to move, I think the staff and the actual soul of the museum and the staff and the admin should remain in the CBD. I really do. And I think the storage facility at Castle Hill is nothing but a storage facility. I mean, I've been out there, I've seen everything. It's not a museum. It is a storage facility, and all these amazing objects are up there. And you open drawers, and there are fabulous things in these drawers, and you open, you see, the thing is that the curators, a museum is only as good as its director and its curators and its collections. And that's what museums are all about. And it's really got to all stay together. And Parramatta has to have another cultural centre. I mean, if this museum is revitalised, the other one can be, the one in Parramatta can, you know, share the exhibitions. It can be as kind of an annex, I suppose, or it can be a centre where collections from the Australian Museum and the Powerhouse can share exhibitions and collections. It's really got to do with inspired leadership, I think, and excellent curators who know what they're doing and have some sort of vision. So, I mean, I don't really think it's a good idea to move the directorate out to Parramatta. I certainly don't. And certainly not now, because when is Parramatta going to be happening? In 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, we don't know. I mean, it's in the future. What we have now is a building, and we have a collection. Let us concentrate our efforts in revitalising that building and putting some money into it and getting people excited about it. You know, it's just so important, really, to keep it in the CBD.
I think, I might just ask one more question. I think You touched on earlier the sense of uncertainty and not knowing about what is going to happen. And I wondered if you had any reflections on the impact that that has had on the actual exhibitions and curatorial work that has been going on in the Powerhouse at Ultimo over the last few years. And we've received some other evidence that essentially that's been deprioritised, that it hasn't been receiving the kind of funding and attention that it might have in years gone by. And in the last few years, that the Powerhouse has sort of been allowed to decline in a way. And I wondered if that was your experience, or you had any reflections on the way that the leadership of the museum and its resourcing over the last few years.
Yes, I mean, I think really for the last 10 years, really, it has been declining because of poor leadership, poor decisions, poor funding, not enough proper funding, and also the sort of perception that people have that the minute we heard, and that was 5 years ago, 2015, the minute we heard Mike Baird's decision about moving it, everybody sort of lost interest, you know? And why would donors give things to a museum that's out of Parramatta? I mean, people want that sort of museum to be in the CBD. Another sort of museum can be at Parramatta. It's a great idea, you know? It's a great idea, and I think that should happen in time. But I think we should really concentrate on what we have.
Surely we can all agree that there should be something spectacular and international best class at Parramatta that responds to Parramatta's own cultural attributes and its own story. But there should be something urgent and amazing at Parramatta. We all agree on that.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
And it can have, I mean, that could attract big blockbuster exhibitions and things, you know, that would attract big audiences.
Star Wars.
I do agree that but at the moment, it's not looking like a museum. It's looking more like an, sort of cultural centre.
It's going to have a farmer's market out there.
I know.
against
There are all these ideas.
I have nothing against the farmers.
It's going to have
noticed,
bits
Julie.
and pieces of this
But
and
the
that.
farm, thank you, Rose.
It's not looking to me like a proper museum. I mean, I'm very used to going to museums in Europe and in London, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. I know what museums are. And museums really depend on the generosity of benefactors and donors. And if there's uncertainty about a museum, nobody's going to give anything. So I think it's really important to concentrate on, revitalising that museum.
I don't have any additional questions.
Mr. Deputy Chair?
I just had one question about the minister. I'm actually a very nice chair.
No, you ruled me out of order, which I will exact my revenge.
And it was an accurate ruling. Well,
But I will exact my revenge.
There are multiple buildings on the Ultimo side, and we had the minister in his last contribution to this committee describe the tram shed site as a 1980s building. I don't know if you saw that or heard that contribution.
I'm not surprised.
Glendenning. Could you describe, if you can, what you think the heritage significance of that building is?
Well, it goes beyond the heritage significance. I'd start with its, maybe the point Anne was making, Anne Schofield, that the museum in Ultimo was established as a completely integrated, museologically powerful expression of a museum. It had extraordinary display spaces. It had a huge variety to match the variety of the collection. And it was supported by a range of specialist spaces. And those specialist spaces were within walking distance, 100 metres max. There's deep storage in the basement, and I distinctly remember making the distinction between display storage, which is the sort of thing we have at Castle Hill, and the deep storage, which is located in the Harwood building. There's armoury, there's weapons, there's whole collections that require super security. The accessibility of the collection is fundamental to the research and the operation of a curatorial professional, and you've heard that from others this morning. The opportunity for conservation and the dry and wet labs that are in existence there. There's an opportunity with the small exhibition space at one end to do specialist exhibitions and link them to the Gary building. The building itself is a very simple building, and I think in its simplicity it has a potential to be used for a number of uses, the least of which is a lyric theatre, I might add. Yes. But, you know, there are better sites for that if you're going to build a lyric theatre, but there's something strange about the obsession with lyric theatre on this site. So it's not a development site, let me say that about it. From a heritage point of view, and one of my papers really addresses the whole heritage issue, and I do hope this committee has the opportunity to delve deeper into the listing and all the other issues related to the way in which the Heritage Council is going about doing its work, because I make certain, oh God, you
assertions.
know, I do assertions, thank you, opinions, you know, express them rather robustly about that process, because I suspect other things have gone on, but there you go. It is an integral part of this professional setup for a real museum, you know, a museum that can allow things to work. If you move it all out to Castle Hill, basically that's what the building is. It's a building that supports the exhibition spaces in Ultimo, and their extraordinary amount of exhibition space is 20,000 square metres, which is big and not replicated in Parramatta. That will be basically a licence to write cab charge tickets. You're going to be sending people, you know, you have 53,000 exhibit movements, you know, they're people adjusting and modifying, cleaning, moving stuff around. The risk goes up exponentially as you increase the level of movement. And the beauty of having it right next door, and I, as part of the original development, was going to provide a tunnel, a direct tunnel access from the basement across the MacArthur Street to the switch building where the goods lift is located, to access all the levels within the building, to minimise the risk of the collection and to provide really efficient, clear access that's secure for both the staff and the curators. And so those things are there, ready to go. They work. They're professionally available to operate. We work to I must say the powerhouse when it was built to have quite a low cost per metre squared compared with other museums around the state and the gallery. We deliberately worked hard to maximise the budget, and therein again was the argument for retaining the existing buildings. I didn't have to build all that. We just simply repaired it and conserved it and put new facilities, new air conditioning and what have you in it, and reused as much of that. I mean, the seawater conduits operate so there's no cooling towers in it operates much as the same as the Opera House or the AMP building. It utilises the seawater, as does the Maritime Museum. So, you know, in terms of state-of-the-art, it leapt the state-of-the-art and went into the whole new realm of sustainability and environmental sustainability. So, you know, there are things about the building and certainly about the air conditioning and other systems that needs updating, the control systems, the digitising of the systems, whatever. They're all necessary to upgrade. It's just part and parcel of a monumental exercise of dealing with it. And I've prepared some budgets, and I've said and I've publicly stated that for probably 150 million, you would be able to do a complete refurbishment of the whole facility and bring it right up to speed, and then hopefully fund it sensibly into its future and not constantly nibble away at the edges of these institutions.
My final question was to you, Mr. Glendenning, was there's another 15 minutes. I have plenty more actually. But the final question I'll put for the moment is
We're actually
the
1 minute over now.
2014.
It's actually 3:15.
Yeah,
The,
1 minute
oh,
over.
okay. The
1
20.
minute, oh, sorry, I've been a bit lengthy.
Oh,
too.
it's
No, it's not your fault at all, Mr. Glendenning.
No, it's actually
I didn't
3,
turn the page over,
oh,
Mr.
3:15,
Glendenning.
I see.
I
But
didn't
there's
turn
no
the page
afternoon
over.
tea.
There is no afternoon. Do you have any views on the 2014 business case that was prepared by the trustees, which seems to be getting a fresh life through the minister at the moment?
Yeah, I think, look, there's, as I've said in the opening comments, this process is so flawed, it's not making sense. The logic, look, can I just spend one moment searching for the quote that I've got? And it's a quote from Winston Churchill, you know, God love him, he said it all.
He said many things.
Yeah, well, he said this, let me tell you. The powerhouse move to Parramatta defies logic. Okay, this is what he said. A riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. End of story. I just cannot begin to comment on the flawed nature of the documentation that has basically been used as a support for this move. The fundamental logic needs to be understood, that no one disagrees with the need for cultural space in Parramatta. I have been involved, and you will hear testimony from Suzette Mead in the days to come, how beautiful a site there is at Parramatta. It's called the Fleet Street site. It's loaded with heritage. It's fantastic. You could do it in a way that would be far more cost effective and get far more trophy buildings to open over the life of 3 years or whatever.
Mr. Glendenning, at the
Yes.
end of this process, we make a number of recommendations. So would you recommend that the site be moved to the female factory?
Completely. Yes,
The Fleet Street precinct?
completely.
Is
The
that how you
Fleet Street
describe-
piece, it's a perfect
Yep.
lay-down misère. You've got the light rail,
Female
you've got
factory.
80 metres walk from the CBD. It's not flood-prone, it's rich, its history is extraordinary. Women's stories, it's made to...
It's deserving of World Heritage listing.
As I said to the Lord Mayor yesterday morning at a meeting, if I were 20 years younger, I'd be pitching for the job.
I'd even be happy to go to the Don Harwin Memorial Hall there.
All right, on that
one there.
juncture,
Well,
thank you very
I
much.
meant commemorative hall. I
Thank
did
you,
actually mean
commemorative hall.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Glendenning. Thank
that's
you,
how I
Ms.
meant it to
Schofield, for
read.
coming. You've
Thank
been
you.
most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
listening.
so much.
Thank you, Ms. Schofield.